Hello, and thank you for joining us today in our studies of Second Kings. Today we're in Second Kings chapter 6, and once again we have a situation that arises between Syria and Israel, and actually it's going to come in a couple of different phases over the course of the chapter. And so let's look at some things that we can see and that we can learn. There's a lot that we could unpack from this chapter. We're just going to pick out a couple of things to look at and to examine from this text. Early on in the chapter, you have a situation where the king of Syria is going to invade into Israel. But Elisha, knowing by means of his status as a prophet where the Syrian army is going to go, lets the king of Israel know where they're going to be camped, and they watch and they turn them back from that particular area. And so you have this question, this idea that the Syrian king is going to bring out about how did they know? How did they find out where we were going to be and what was going on? Now, the king of Syria has this question from the standpoint of who in my inner circle is a traitor? Who is it that is informing the king of Israel of our situation? Now, his servants will tell him that it is not any of them, that it is Elisha. And yet, at the same time, it offers the question to us of how did they know it was Elisha? It seems that the king of Syria's informants in the northern kingdom of Israel are better than the king of Israel's informants among the Syrian people, unless you include Elisha. But you have a situation here where there is recognition that these things don't happen by chance. Somebody is passing along information. Somebody is laying the foundation for the other side to be successful. You know, there's a lot of times where people talk about information passing simply by, well, I heard the other day. Most times people don't glean information unless somebody intentionally lets them know. And there are a lot of ways in which individuals, through the gossip mills and things of that nature, pass on information about others and other circumstances that it's not necessary for them to know. Now, here Elisha is giving the king of Israel information he needs to know. But we need to be very careful that we're not doing things in such a way, and that we're not being disloyal to the word of others in such a way that we cause others to kind of speak up like the king of Syria does here and say, how did they know? Who told what it was that I confided in somebody else? Honesty and trustworthiness are important. And they're just as important to many of us individually as they are to a king when it comes to things of that nature. And so let us be those that when they start asking, how did they know? We can honestly say, well, they didn't hear it from me. In the second place, as you come down a little bit further, you have the king of Syria who, now that Elisha has messed with his plans, he is going to try to get Elisha back. He is told where Elisha is, and he is going to send a unit of men to go down and to surround the city of Dothan where Elisha is staying. And of course, those who are with Elisha look out and they see the army of the Syrians, and they see that they are greatly outnumbered. And Elisha's servant even says in verse 6 or 15, he says, "Alas, my master, what shall we do?" And Elisha is going to point out to him that those that are on his side are greater and mightier than those that are on the Syrians' side. And then he's going to state in verse 17, "Lord, I pray you to open his eyes so that he may see." And the Lord gives a vision at that point of this massive army that is surrounding the Syrians on the mountains on every side. Now, this is not a physical army. This is not an army of men, but rather it is a sign that God is on Elisha's side and that God is bigger than any army that can be fielded. As a matter of fact, they're going to strike the Syrian army blind. They're going to lead them directly into the king's lap in Samaria and turn them over to the king of Israel. But there needs to be this constant reminder in our lives that it doesn't matter what it is we're facing. It doesn't matter what problems we're struggling with or what it is that we're coming against. God is bigger. God is stronger. Now, it doesn't mean that everything's going to magically disappear or that everything is always going to go our way or that everything is going to resolve itself the way that we would like it to. But it does mean that God is bigger and that there are things that are greater and things that are more important in the long run. And so here we see Elisha's army as a means of illustrating the power of God, yes, but also the ability of God. In the latter half of chapter 6, you have a situation where the king of Syria, Ben-Hadad, is going to come down and he is going to lay siege to the capital of Israel, to Samaria. We don't have specific dates on all of these different events to know exactly when they fall and how close together they come. But at this time, Ben-Hadad is going to come and he is going to lay siege to Samaria. It is going to cause a great famine in Samaria. It's going to be so bad that a donkey's head is going to be sold for 80 shekels of silver because food has become so scarce. And it's interesting to note that the king of Israel, in the midst of all of this, does not blame anybody but God and Elisha for what it is that transpires. As a matter of fact, he says in verse 31, God do so to me, and more so, if the head of Elisha the son of Shaphat remains on him today. The king of Israel blames Elisha. The king of Israel does not give any consideration to any of the other factors that might be involved in what it was that was happening. He's going to blame Elisha, even though Elisha has helped him on many occasions, even though Elisha has been trying to show the king of Israel the power of God and to follow after God and to do what God says. God is the one to blame. And thereby Elisha is the one to blame. And the last verse of chapter 6, remember, this account is going to be continued in chapter 7, and we're not going to see the conclusion of what transpires here in chapter 6. But chapter 7 ends with the king stating, surely this calamity is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer? In other words, this is all God's fault. And so why should I have any trust in him anymore? When bad things happen, this is exactly the way many people respond. There will be those that will turn to God when they haven't turned to God before. But then there will be those who say, listen, if this has happened, God must be doing it, and so why should I put my faith in him anymore? Now, Elisha is going to work in chapter 7 to try to lay things out for the king of Samaria. But at the same time, there is no faith in God in the king of Israel. So these are some of the things that I find in 2 Kings chapter 6. There are things that we can pull from this chapter. There's a lot of things that we didn't have time to go into any detail about. But I hope maybe this helps to put some things into perspective. Next time we'll come back and we'll begin looking at 2 Kings chapter 7. I hope you'll join us then. But until then, have a great day.